Before we dive in, I want to thank today's sponsor, Searchality, for supporting the Independent School Moonshot podcast. When I ask a school leader to name their top 3 headaches, recruitment, retention of staff inevitably comes up. Talent shortages, costs, and the need for continuous recruitment strategies are some of the current challenges you may face. Searchality is here to help schools minimize the pain and the cost of recruiting faculty and staff with a smart platform built exclusively for K-12 schools. Built and run by a team of people who understand schools and hiring, Searchality works to make it easier for the people who oversee and make the recruitment decisions. With a strong database of talented teachers both in the US and internationally, Searchality also makes the application process work for candidates, matching vacancies with candidates' qualifications, experience, and career goals. Integrating easily with school website, onboarding is a matter of hours. Searchality eases the pain of the HR teams, heads, and business managers by drastically reducing the time and cost involved in faculty recruitment, while leaving candidates with a positive application experience. To learn how Searchality can support your school, visit searchality.com. That's SearchAlity.com. And now on to the show. Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. I am thrilled to be joined by Meredith Herrera. She is the founder and executive coach of Meredith Herrera Consulting. And we got connected not too long ago and had this amazing conversation around change management, which is a topic that I think a lot about. There's so many instances over the course of my career where change management has been a really important part of the conversations that I've been having with schools. And, what I have learned over time is that it's hard. Change management is hard. It's not easy. So we're going to have a conversation today about ways in which you can approach that, especially, within the context of this podcast and kind of going for your moonshot and thinking about new ways for sustainability. Certainly change and change management is going to be part of that work. So with that, Meredith, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about this topic. It's near and dear to my heart, and it's something I talk about all day long and feel like I don't get enough of. So it's great.
Well, and I can't wait to get into it. We're gonna have a great conversation, I know. But before we do that, can you introduce yourself and your company?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Meredith Herrera or Herrera, depending on if you do or do not want to roll the R's. And I started a company 4.5 years ago. For context, I spent a long time as a senior leader in schools, and I'm a certified executive coach and a board certified coach with a background in human development and counseling. And really what I do today is I help leaders and teams, and particularly leaders who have been historically marginalized, just find more ease and confidence in the day-to-day work that they are asked to do and the sort of complex set of responsibilities that most of us who have leadership roles in schools are saddled with. I guess the best way to describe my work is that I really help leaders build sort of the inner architecture they need. So the mindsets, the resilience, just the skills that sometimes we don't learn when we're promoted into leadership. And then I help the outer systems, right? The teams build structures, routines, norms that just help folks be successful in executing strategy, right? We can have a really wonderful strategy, but if we don't have the right habits and mindsets and the right systems, the degree to which we're effective in executing that strategy varies widely. And I never had a plan to start my business. I think you and I talked earlier in our previous conversation that the reason I started my business is because my friend yelled at me at lunch one day. But a lot of the work that I did in schools was about helping figure out systems that brought more joy in the work of being an educator, and particularly in the work of being a leadership role. And when I left schools and really had planned to just kind of take a little bit of a break, pump the brakes and think about what my next steps would be, many schools were reaching out to kind of, at the time, I sort of described myself as administrative relief pitching to help with a project here or coach a person there. And I really fell in love with that work. I love getting to look under the hood of a lot of different kinds of places, working with a lot of different kinds of leaders and within a lot of different systems to help folks feel that the work can be more sustainable and feel more confident in the work. So that's what I do. It's pretty great.
And knowing, gosh, I've had so many conversations where leaders talk about how like the daily demands get in the way, inhibit their ability to be strategic. I can imagine that your work is becoming increasingly important with each passing year. And I'm wondering, a part of that work might require some self-reflection. How am I going to change my ways? Or if you take it up to the team level, like how are we going to change our ways collectively as a team? But that's always really hard. And I guess the question I have is around like how do we underestimate that, about that human side of change when new systems or structures or positions, like you're part of a new position, like how does that play out?
Yeah, maybe I can blame it on my sort of developmental training, but I tend to view a lot of this stuff through the prism of human development. So what do we know about people? We know that when change happens, it produces a lot of discomfort. It's taxing on the nervous system. And even if we agree that the change is good, like let's say we all agree in a school community, let's pick something that nobody really likes doing, like building a new schedule. No one loves being on the scheduling committee, right? But we all agree it's good. It's good for kids. It's going to be better for faculty in the long run. So even when we agree that change is good, change feels like loss. And for a lot of us on an individual or on a collective level, on a team level, that change is going to mean people are going to lose a sense of comfort. They're going to lose a sense of routine. They may be asked to enter a proximal zone of development. So they may lose a sense of competence or authority. And when we enter into that, right, that's going to tickle our amygdalas big time. We're going to find ourselves in a place of uncertainty. And that positions us to be more prone to react emotionally instead of strategically. And so one of the things that I think, particularly for leaders who are navigating change or trying to lead an institution or culture through change, one of the mistakes I see is that really well-intentioned leaders think the solution is sort of endless communication. Well, if I just give this folk, like if the schedule committee comes up on every faculty meeting and we provide update after update, we're good, right? Because I just talked to that person at lunch and they recognize that we need the new schedule. So we're all good. Everyone's going to be fine, right? And I think what we forget sometimes about the adults we work with in schools, that we tend to not forget when we're talking about the children we work with in schools, is that we don't need endless communication. We need clarity. So what that means is I need to know what exactly is changing. What exactly isn't changing? What are the new expectations of my role? And am I going to have any time or new tools to be supported in executing my new set of responsibilities? And then the final thing I'll say is that, Peter, are you right-handed or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
Okay. So every morning and presumably at night and maybe sometimes in between, when you go to brush your teeth, do you mostly brush your teeth with your right hand?
I would, yeah, most of the time, for
right?
sure.
Probably. It's a well-worn groove in your brain at this point. There was a time in life where you didn't know how to brush your teeth, where somebody had to like show you how or teach you how and reinforce that. And if I said to you, okay, Peter, for the next 6 months, you are not allowed to brush your teeth with your right hand. You can only brush your teeth with your left hand. That's absolutely a task that you and I both know you could do. But it's awkward. It's probably going to take more intense remembering. And so when we're talking about change in schools, that for those changes to take shape will require unlearning old habits. Change requires new behaviors almost always. And so we need to remember that for new behaviors to be sticky, we got to get our reps in. We need structure, we need patience, we need repetition. Don't worry, you can brush your teeth with your right hand.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just joking. You don't have to brush your teeth with your left hand.
Well, that's all I'm going to be thinking about for the next 20 minutes. Can I brush my teeth with my left hand?
You can. I think maybe you can.
I'm gonna start experimenting tonight. You said that part of becoming a leader is knowing what changes and what doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
Like how is a new leader supposed to know that? Like, does that responsibility fall on their supervisor? Whatever when they're doing the job description. Like how are they supposed to figure that piece of it out?
The what does and doesn't change.
Yeah.
I think where I default to is that we all want to be set up for success. And what we know sets people up for success is structure and information. And, you know, in the work that you do, right, it's really about belaboring a real operating system and not guesswork. And I think the same here is true for leadership. So if I'm stepping into a new role, presumably I've received some type of job description. Although shockingly, so much of the work that I do with schools, I'll come to find out that there is no job description. So that's the first place I would start is what are the set of responsibilities and how do we imagine those are being expressed? And then I think that has to be married or weighed against other principal documents that the school might have that are relevant, like a new strategic plan. And so the academic dean position based on the strategic plan is tasked with executing these three functions. Like I need to know that. But I think it has more to do with building consistent structure over time. So clear decision-making norms, clear communication channels, clear feedback loops, something as simple as like, do we have aligned agendas? Do we have an agenda? And predictable routine, and then building into any change implementation process, regular beats to pause, regular times where we're taking a step, accessing a higher altitude to ask ourselves, okay, what is my progress towards goal? Am I getting lost in the day-to-day, or am I really operating strategically at a high altitude? To do that, to build in that kind of self-reflection time or team reflection time, requires good executive function. It requires some of the stuff that we don't learn. Most of us, I think, to answer your question, I think we need to name a fact on the ground for most leaders, which in schools, which is that most folks find themselves in leadership because they have good relational skills or they have good instructional skills. And that's wonderful. But that's not the same thing as good leadership skills. So to be a good leader requires building some other kinds of muscles that maybe, so I think it's having good conversations with your supervisors or team or a board if you're the head. I think it's having a clear job description. And if that's not clear, you go back and have another conversation about how to make it more clear. I think it's about doing some of the work that you do where you're really turning goals into action plans at regular intervals that we revisit regularly and often to check progress towards goal. So those would be some of the ways that I would help a leader learn how to sift and sort.
Got me thinking about before we got on the pod, we were talking about anxiety, talking about how people may feel unprepared as they're moving into these periods of transitions. Maybe it's a transitionary period at your school, or you're taking on a new role, like whatever it may be, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think part of that is that part of that can be eased by what you had just shared, or are there other things as well? Like, are you noticing other patterns too?
Well, I think to start, if it's okay, I'd like to sort of maybe level set and talk about, or maybe come to some shared understanding of what we mean by anxious or unprepared leadership. Like, what are some of the signs of that? How do we know?
Yeah, good point.
Because for example, I became an administrator in my mid-20s. I had no business being in charge of things. Who thought that was a good idea? I don't know. And I could kind of fake the funk in front of people. But internally, I would definitely describe myself as an anxious and unprepared administrator. And here were some of the things that I was doing that are kind of a tell. Anxious, unprepared folks tend to overfunction. They do everyone's work and don't delegate particularly well. Sometimes new leaders really want to be liked. They want to be successful. They confuse successful for being liked. And so that makes them do things like avoid hard conversations or softening a message so much so that it's not actually, we don't even know what the message is. They don't have consistent operating systems. A lot of this I see happen when folks come from the classroom and they're just not. When you move into senior administration from the classroom, all of a sudden instead of spending most of your time with children, you're spending most of your time in a school day with adults. And so some of the tools and practices need to adjust accordingly. I think there can sometimes be, and particularly because I coach a lot of marginalized leaders, folks who are historically underrepresented in school leadership, there can often be a perfectionism. So we have a reluctance to iterate or make mistakes, or we resist experimentation because we don't want to appear as if we don't know what we're doing. And we can sometimes personalize resistance. So those are some of the maybe symptoms I think that, heads could look out for to kind of know if one of their leaders might be in need of a little bit more support. And then in terms of, how do you support that leader? I think there's a lot of ways. I mean, we talked about one earlier, which is that you're giving them, if you are the head or you are the supervising person in that equation, in that hierarchical structure, you're providing your senior leaders with as much clear structure as you possibly can around their expectations, around communications, around what committees they're supposed to be in or not. Secondly, I think you are recognizing that most administrators are promoted because of their personalities, not because they have a whole bunch of leadership training. So they need to build leadership muscles around navigating conflict, how to build influence and power in an organization, how to give feedback, how to manage the change we're talking about. These are all discrete skills. Finally, I think the biggest thing is that leaders need, I think this is just good for humans, thought partnership that's proactive. When we ask students to write a paper, we often break that assignment out into discrete chunks and we say, edit and revise and turn in a first draft and we'll talk about it. And then you get to turn in a second draft. So I think effective support is having someone to think through decisions before they hit the community. So for example, when I first became a dean of students, I entered into a community that had some, how shall I say, traditions for welcoming new students that I found to be really toxic and really just unhealthy for kids. But it was this much beloved sort of boulder in the community. And I knew that to shift that was I had enough sense to know that that was going to cause a lot of resistance. But because I was new in the role, I needed to gather my intel. I needed to do a lot of recon in advance to understand the best way to roll out this decision that was inevitably going to upset people. It was much better for me to have sounding boards, both in my school and outside of my school, to do that work with. It allowed me to make a better decision and a better process. So that's why I think coaching, and particularly coaching for folks who maybe aren't at the head level, but the division director level or chair level or dean level, can be one of the ways to provide that proactive support and sounding board work.
What other thing? I agree with you on coaching. I mean, I've said this on the pod a number of times. I had a coach when I was at EMA, and she changed my life. Hands down, changed my life. I owe her a lot. But if a school can't, offer a coaching program at the mid-level to the mid-level, what are some other things that you're seeing that are really effective in terms of supporting leaders or future leaders?
Yeah, I think they're kind of two separate questions. I think supporting existing leadership, supporting existing leadership is to really sort of regularly and often as an administrative team. This is where team and building high performance teams can really help the individual leader be successful. So if I have a high performing admin team and I'm a new administrator, I can really leverage that team for their expertise. And it becomes this collective brain trust that can help us make really good decisions. And if we have a culture of critical self-reflection, I think one criticism I have of independent school environments, and I will put myself squarely in this camp as someone who did this, is that they can be very insular places. They can suffer from a lot of self-confirming bias loops. So are we, in the way that we structure our meetings, in the way that we structure our one-on-ones, are we building in time for critical self-reflection on our policies, our practices, and how we're executing our strategy? So that's something that's just real easy to do. So can we sift and sort through our priorities? And even though there's stuff as an admin team, there's fires that are always burning, there's always something to react to. Can we build a little bit more emotional distance and mindfulness to concentrate on like the big ticket items? So I think that's that you can leverage your team for a lot of support. I think there's some great professional development out there. And I think one of the things that I always tell leaders and new leaders is to build their network outside of their school, see what other schools are doing. And not once has an administrator at a school contacted me to say, hey, can we come visit? We like what you're doing with your restorative discipline, or we really think your math curriculum is really interesting at the secondary level. Can we, like, no administrator is going to say no to that.
Right.
So I think kind of learn and leverage the expertise of other people and gather as much intel as you can to make as well an informed decision about the change you need to implement as possible. And finally, I'd say time management. I know this isn't like a very sexy thing, but it's really important. And what I mean by time management is that almost always when you're in a leadership role, you're kind of the bullseye. There's a lot of stuff that you're going to have to do and decisions you're going to have to make or changes you're going to need to implement that to make one constituency, one stakeholder group happy in your community, it's going to disappoint another. So you will inevitably be on the sort of receiving end of whether it's frustration or negativity or complaint. That's going to happen in leadership. So what I mean by time management is really ensuring that as you enter these more charged conversations or as you're recovering from more charged conversations, you have time to do that well. You have time, when you and I were talking about doing this podcast, we were really talking about sort of the human side of change. And I think that's the human part. We have to recognize that even though we're leaders, things are going to still hit us. And we need to build in the space we need to reflect and ground so that we can be responsive, not reactive.
What would that look like? Like time blocking? You've got this conversation, you want to carve out time in the afternoon and just say, I need to process, make sure I process everything.
I think it looks different for different people. I think time blocking is, I will say that I think if there's a leader listening to this, I want them to ask themselves this question. Do you have the most ownership over your calendar, or do other people in the institution have the most ownership over your calendar? Yeah. And if the answer is the latter, then that probably means you need to take a look at your calendar and build some time to be strategic and build some time to just be. Are you always responding to things off hours? Are you never allowing yourself time to recover? Are there norms in our team that these are the hours we do and don't respond unless it's like, a big time emergency, right? So I think that's where the structures come in. There's lots of exercises I do in sessions around prioritization and how to time block and how to do a to-do list and how to prioritize between competing priorities. There's lots of sort of technical tools that I could nerd out about with a leader one-on-one or in a group. But that's the first place I'd start. Look at your calendar. Who's got more ownership over your time than you do? How many people can gobble up your time? And if you are someone who has no white space in your calendar and you're not ever blocking work time in your calendar, then you might be one of those leaders that I talked about earlier that's overfunctioning. Where you're thinking that a good leader is someone who's just constantly active instead of a strategic.
At that senior leadership team level, does the head have to set those norms?
It really helps.
I'm just thinking specifically around getting the Sunday morning email saying, hey, do you have this thing? And you're like, oh, I don't want to do it. But I guess around some of those norms that you were talking about, how important is it for the head to model those behaviors?
It's a really good question. I think I have a nuanced answer. Mm-hmm. I think in principle, it's important for the head to model the type of balanced, emotionally constant leadership they want to see in their team. And here's my asterisk. There are certain exceptions to, we can't be so rigid. Good leaders are agile. We can't be so rigid to a norm that we are unwilling to make exceptions when it makes sense. But it's the when it makes sense. Have we had a group conversation that really clarifies what our norms are around communication? We have co-created those norms, so everybody has shared ownership over executing those norms. And have we clarified when would it be okay or appropriate or frankly necessary to violate those norms? So as someone who had to respond to a lot of student emergencies, a lot of hospitalizations, a lot of gnarly legal things, you can't time that stuff, right? you have a death of a student, right? So are we in agreement about that? And are we talking about it regularly and often? Because one of the things that I find doesn't happen enough is we're not talking about that stuff. So I think it's wonderful when the head can model that. Not everybody has a head that's going to model that. Sometimes the way, I've had wonderful leaders in almost every role that I've worked. And what you learn in leadership is that everybody manages their anxiety in different ways, right? Schedule send is your best friend. So if you need to be the person who manages their anxiety by spending 4 hours on your Saturday, responding to all of the emails that you weren't able to respond to during the week, schedule send that for Monday for the vast majority of those emails. Because when that hits your admin team, and I think that the thing I want to say is that what I think leaders in high level positions don't remember. When I confront leaders about this and I say, listen, like this is the feedback I'm getting from your team, and this is sort of the impact of that, there's often a lot of surprise. And wait, but they could just talk to me. Like they know that I don't expect them to answer on Saturday. And I have to sort of remind them that you have more power. And if you have more power in the organization, it doesn't matter that you think you've talked about it enough. It's just what you're going to have to model. And I think good leadership is also about sacrifice. You make sacrifices for your team so the whole unit can operate at a high level, not just one or two individuals because of one or two individual styles.
Well said. I mean, and it's making me think more about just the power of coaching and how that can be a stabilizing force when maybe you have clashing working styles or you're at a point of high tension, or whatever the conditions, creating higher trust. Like, do you find that's one of the areas that coaching can really drive a lot of value?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think most leaders intellectually agree with things that I've said. Most leaders I agree, Meredith, I don't manage my time well and I'm not blocking off enough time to be strategic. But what I get is, but I don't feel like I can. Everything feels so urgent. Everything feels on fire. How do I really grow capacity to do that? So kind of revisiting how we started this conversation about how any meaningful change will require learning new habits, and any meaningful change will put you in your proximal zone of development. And that's going to mean you are going to feel uncomfortable. So one of the things that I think I do a lot as a coach is just normalize discomfort early. Like, this may feel messy. This may feel uncomfortable. You may feel scary even to block off this time. How can we do that in a way that's going to feel uncomfortable so you can learn and grow, but not so uncomfortable that something's like snapping in half? We want to stay in that juicy middle ground zone. And so I think coaching can be a place to workshop communication, ideas, strategies before you really have to. And taking that extra beat will make you more impactful. So we want to be impactful. We don't want to necessarily be high volume. So I think, and building your own support system more broadly beyond coaching, right? Mentors, affinity networks. Particularly if you're a historically underrepresented leader, finding people who share a similar experience or maybe navigate some of the unique pressure points, pain points that schools have that you have to navigate, where there's shared understanding and empathy. I think that's really important. But, I spent most of my morning this morning with clients coaching, and so much of what we talked about today was role-playing difficult conversations that they need to have. And they know they need to have them, and they're already on the calendar to be scheduled. But what we're really doing is we're working through the kinks in a safe container.
What a gift that is to have somebody to do that with.
For sure. Yeah. And the goal, right, with these, you talked earlier about pipeline, and I realized as we're talking, I didn't really address it. But when we're talking about building leadership pipeline, my goal in working with my clients is that we work together for a meaningful length of time, and then they're equipped and armed with all these new skills. Yeah. And those new skills help them feel greater success in their day-to-day work. And now, moreover, they're now in a position to teach those skills to other people. And I think that's part of how you build pipeline. I mean, I have some other thoughts on pipeline, but connected to this particular point, I think the goal is to, teach folks to fish.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, like, what are some of those other ideas you have around pipeline?
If I had one wish, it would be that schools audit their job descriptions. And so if you're going to put someone in a position that has sort of positional authority, and in some ways they're able to kind of like let's take a department chair position. This is a role in a school that's often tricky. Middle management is tricky. What are the expectations, and how empowered or not is that role in executing those expectations? Are they a union rep? Are they a passer of information? Or do they have some managerial expectations as part of that role? And I'm not suggesting that one path, like different schools need different things. But I think if you want to build more in-house leadership, you need to provide pathways to leadership in-house. And you need to be clear about how people can grow, which usually means you need to have some type of robust system of evaluation and feedback. If I'm a teacher who has ambitions to be an administrator one day, but no one has visited my classroom and talked to me about how good or not good I am at teaching in the last 4 years, it's going to be really difficult for me to A, feel supported by leadership, or B, see how I might in 10 years be a leader in that place. If I'm a department chair and every time one of my department members comes to me with a complaint about what the senior admin is doing, and I am not expected to navigate that. Instead, I just kind of pass that email along to the division director or the associate head of school, and I don't actually have to like see or practice like how the sausage gets made, then I'm not getting any skill development. I'm not building the skills I will need if I want to be a director one day. So I think opportunities to practice. I also think shadowing. I used to ask, this was more for other reasons, but I used to ask folks that I supervised to shadow lots of different roles in the school. So if you want to be a good leader, you need to learn how a school runs. So you need to spend some time in the business office, even if it violates your sort of sensibilities to see schools as businesses. They are, but you got to go hang out with the CFO. You need to understand facilities, the stuff that we don't think about, but those are the things that make schools run well. So those are some of the things. So, professional development expectations are clear. There are actual professional development expectations. Professional development at a lot of schools can sometimes be what an individual just kind of wants to do. But how are we growing that person's skills, and to what end?
Yeah, I'm hearing like the need for intentionality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that would be the key word, I suppose. The word of the day.
Word of the day. So as we begin to wrap up the pod, I always like to close the episode with kind of an actionable thing that a school can use. So in this case, I'm thinking about, a head of school calls you, there's like big change on the horizon. They see it, they know it, but they also can feel some of the anxiety building internally. What advice would you offer that head on how to approach that work?
That's such a good question. I think some of it is education. Part of it is like, here's what resistance looks like in schools. It's the side conversations. It's the nods of heads in the meeting from folks who normally speak up. So part of it is just helping them become more attuned to the ecosystem of the school to understand people's reactions. I would probably want to audit their process. How have you communicated this change? How do you plan to communicate this change? What groups of people are you maybe not considering or privileging as much? What biases might be operating here that we haven't examined or explored? What are historical ways that we've done things? And how are we disrupting that? And if we are not disrupting that historical way of doing it, if we're doing it the same way, why? So it'd be a lot of sort of a lot of reflection. And then I think building containers, when we think about things like big initiatives that schools undertake, like a strategic plan, or we're going to phase out, a language program, and this has real material costs and cost on personnel, like these big things that really affect people. Yeah. A lot of it is about being super thoughtful in how we communicate, building container for people to express themselves, not expecting people to be happy with the change all the time. So I think it's kind of building, again, it's about building systems, building architecture, communication rhythms, routines, because most folks, now I think when you have big change in schools, to be honest, you're going to have your early adopters, your folks that just need a little convincing and then they're on board. And then you're going to have folks that are like, over my dead body, am I accepting this?
Yeah.
And that's just true. But I think when you have high trust, what tends to make people angry isn't that the new schedule that we all agree is a good idea. It's when they're surprised by things. Being surprised, people don't react well to being surprised, especially if it affects their employment or their day-to-day stress level. So the degree to which a head of school can minimize surprise, I believe, is done through building structures of communication, rhythms of communication, and routine as the change is being discussed, iterated, implemented.
Yeah, that's such good advice. I appreciate. I like that. No surprises. That's great. That's something that I can relate to on a lot of levels. Hey, Meredith, this has been terrific. If somebody wants to reach out and continue the conversation, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can always hop on my website, and it's just Herrera, HERRERA consulting.com.
Fantastic. And I will link to your website in the show notes so people have easy access to this. Meredith, thank you again. This has been terrific. And I know I've got a lot to take in on this one that I'm going to sit down and really think about. So I love it when that happens.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I'm so happy to be here and really grateful for the opportunity to chat with you.
Great. Thanks, Meredith.
Thank you.